Good evening. You're watching Out Here in the Redwoods. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Denise Riles, and tonight we are continuing with our third segment on Polygamy Today. Let's give a round of applause and a great big welcome to our dear friend and talk show host yourself, Rebecca Kimball. Welcome, hello. So nice to see you again. Now, we talked about, the last time you were on, we talked about what happened to the women. And you've been big. You just gave a talk over the weekend. Can I ask, what happens to the boys? Is it all that it's cracked up to be for the women? For the men, sorry. Getting all these girls. Is it paradise for a man?
Unfortunately, it is not. Let me explain the facts and the truth about the downside of polygamy, even for men, especially for men. We'll stick to that side of it tonight.
Yeah.
Harry Reid, Senator Harry Reid, said that polygamy was organized crime.
Did he?
Yes, he did. And in order for you to understand that polygamy is organized crime, you need to understand how organized crime works. It works the same in religion as it does outside of religion.
Really?
Yes, it does.
You got the mob boss and the whole shebang.
Well, the mob boss, of course, is the prophet, the one who has the final rule and blind obedience or else.
Okay.
All right, so that's consistent.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, polygamy is like a pyramid. There is the mob boss or the prophet at the
Okay.
top, and he has several guys underneath him that are his big shots and help control. And then those guys control the guys below them. Mm-hmm. And those guys branch out and control the groups below them. And it goes on down, and at the bottom of the pyramid are the women and the children. The most helpless people are always at the bottom of the pyramid.
Holding
Now-
everything else up. Really?
Well, basically, when you start talking about polygamy, the women and children are the commodity that makes polygamy work. They are the commodity, and we will talk about financing polygamy perhaps on another show and
Sure.
how that works.
Sure.
Because most of the women and the children are financed by your tax dollars, but they are controlled by the men.
So I'm paying for this.
Yes, you are. You certainly are. In the name of God, of course.
Of course. Of course.
Now, for the men, what happens when a young boy is in the inner city and he decides he wants to get into a gang? He sees the money and the bling and the sex and the women and the cars.
Yeah.
And he figures, man, I can have that for nothing, just to jump in.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, same thing in polygamy. You can see a guy from the outside saying, wow, now I'm using a guy on the outside as an example because there's a big difference between children raised in it and those that convert into it.
Yeah, like a guy in, let's say, the audience you were talking to.
Yes.
Could be a guy out there going, wow, that
Oh.
could be for me. Look at all those wives and all of that.
And a lot of guys react just that way.
Really?
Now, what they don't understand is that if you go jump in to polygamist group or organized crime, what happens is you do get all that bling and all the women and all that power, and you control everyone beneath you. What you didn't think about before you went in is that the guys above you control you.
Oh,
You
yes.
have a car, you have all these women, you've got all these kids, you've got everything except your life. It's no longer yours.
You got to do what they tell you.
If you don't do what you're told by the prophet or the leader of the gang, they will take your wives and give them all to somebody else. They will take
Seriously?
your property, they will take your business, and they may take your life.
Oh, my.
Now, I say may take your life because most patriarchal polygamy worldwide, most of it, believes in their basic doctrine in some form of honor killing or blood atonement.
Oh,
It's
we
part
talked
of their
about that,
basic
yeah.
teaching. Okay.
Oh, God.
So you can say all you want to about, oh, well, they never would do that. Wrong. I was born in Utah, where polygamy, power, and murder were front page news for over a decade.
Oh my.
So the power struggle between polygamous leaders is real. For example, if the boys are raised in polygamy and they are taught that they must comply, so they grow up and they work for the prophet. They usually work for free growing up. Child labor is very common in polygamy. Mm-hmm. So they work for the prophet. I know of one case where a young man worked for the prophet very hard for 2 extra years. He'd always worked for the church for nothing, or the religion for nothing, but he worked for 2 extra years because he was told that if he put in 2 more years, he could work for a wife.
Oh, he could work for a wife.
He could work and have a wife, and that would be his first wife. So finally, the day came, and he was told to go to such and such a residence. He was going to be married that night, and he had no idea to whom they were going to give him a wife.
Oh my.
The kid had always been obedient. He had always believed in his religion. He dedicated himself to God. He was devout. So he's a good kid. Mm-hmm. He went that night, and the girl that they brought out to marry him was seriously overweight and retarded.
Oh no.
And they told
not to be
no. And he wept. He wondered what he had done, that God was so angry with him, that his first and only wife would be this poor girl. And the men of the priesthood rebuked him and said, "You'll have many wives. You have no right to deny her of motherhood and to act so arrogant."
Oh.
So they married him to this girl, all right? Now, he was to work again a couple more years or so for another wife. Now, do all the boys get wives? No. Here's the catch-22.
See, that's what everybody thinks.
Yeah, this is the catch-22. You guys that think it's so hot, you grow up in polygamy, guess what? Nature has designed it so there's pretty much an equal number of male and female babies born. So in nature, there would be a mate for everybody. Mm-hmm. In polygamy, the men in power take more and more wives, which means that there is a great number of single men, a huge number of single men working for God's prophet, working for labor, working for God's acceptance, that never get a wife. Now, you
never get a wife?
Never get a wife. Now, you want to document this? Go onto the web and look up Lost Boys. Polygamy's Lost Boys. FLDS Lost Boys. They had lots and lots of boys that would reach an age where they would become competitive, or were going to become competitive for the girls, and they would be run out of the community, sometimes with nothing but a backpack or what they could walk with. And some of them were told it's because they listened to rap music, because they smiled at a girl, any excuse possible to get them out of the older guys' way, because they were going to become competition for the young girls.
Oh.
Anything. Now, these kids that were dedicated to God all their life developed serious immediate problems. Post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidal, depression. They never drank or had drugs before. They started using drugs. This is all documented. Just
trying to numb pain?
Well, they'd been damned. Suddenly God had rejected them. For what? God himself had rejected these boys.
Oh,
this was their belief system. This is more damaging than a kid gets beat up and he runs away from home.
Yeah.
Now, for example, when my older brother, Roger, was 13 years old, now, first let me explain to you that my mother was not my father's favorite wife. She was way down the line. If he wanted to insult somebody, he would call him my mother's name.
Really?
She was very humble and very obedient, and the more she tried, the worse he treated her. She, unfortunately, had his firstborn son. This made her an envy of his favorite wife. So he was getting beatings and things for things he didn't do just because he existed. So Dad,
just because you're first don't mean it's all sugar.
No, it doesn't. It does not. And polygamy's difficult at best for everybody concerned. Mm-hmm. Everybody's emotionally needy. There isn't enough There's not enough time, there's not enough money, there's not enough attention. What does he do? He goes out and gets some more wives and younger wives, and the family, of course, gets bigger and bigger, and all of these problems keep getting bigger. Meanwhile, back to my brother.
Yeah.
Dad beat him with a 2x4. And one of Dad's friends intervened to keep him from killing my brother Roger.
Oh my goodness.
Roger ran away when he was 13. He never went back. He was in Salt Lake City, and in the wintertime he climbed up on top of a Woolworth building and slept by the air conditioning so he wouldn't freeze to death.
Oh
and
my
in the
God.
summertime, he slept in the bushes at the school and stole money from pinball machines. But
Oh,
he tried
poor kid.
but he tried to be presentable during the day so he could get little jobs.
Mm-hmm.
What was he? He was the son of polygamy.
Yeah.
Was he going to get a wife? No. Now you say, well, that just happened to one kid. No, that happens to a lot of kids. To drive the boys away when they reach a point where they're not laboring for the church or the God or the prophet, when they know their labor is no longer enough to keep them there because they're competition. Now, let me explain. Even if you're poor and that boy's supporting that family,
Right.
if he's competition for the older men, he will be mistreated and he will have to leave. Now, you watch the families and the children that succeed, and the boys that succeed and stay in polygamy are those that somehow gain favor.
And
so now,
how do you do that?
all of my father's sons were raised to believe that they could be polygamist.
Okay.
But that did not mean that they were all accepted into the fold into which they were born. Now I need to start defining the folds into which they are born.
Yeah.
Many years ago, in 1945, my father served time in the Utah State Penitentiary with my future father-in-law, uncles, etc.,
Right, right. Oh my.
for crimes related to child brides and trafficking. But they told the world that they were in prison for religious persecution.
Oh.
And the press published that.
Okay.
But the papers in my office tell a different story, the facts.
Okay.
Back then, they called themselves a Council of Friends. Since then, that Council of Friends has broken up into many, many polygamous groups. And each polygamous group claims to be the one and the only prophet of God on earth.
Oh my goodness.
The only one that's right.
Right. Okay.
Only one, all right? And even though that's true, they are not beyond trafficking their daughters back and forth among the different groups to help keep the bloodlines not, a little bit new.
Right. Okay.
I say a little bit new because I don't know if you've ever heard of Fumarus disease.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
that is
yes.
caused from interbreeding.
Right. Right.
And
right.
it is the highest in the world in fundamentalist Mormon polygamist groups.
I wouldn't doubt that. So how does this boy come into this favor?
So what happens is the boy in my father's family, and most of them, the favorite wife, which doesn't have to be the first wife, she can be a younger wife down the road when he's getting old,
Right.
but the favorite wife's son usually comes into favor, and he's backed and supported by the men and whatnot, and he usually becomes a pretty big polygamist. There may be other boys that take polygamous wives, but it is the men in power that take the most.
Oh gosh.
All right. And here's the catch-22 for the boys. If you're born in polygamy and you deny it and you say you don't believe it, the faith says that you're a son of perdition and you can be killed to save your soul. They don't have to kill you, but you might as well be dead. If you leave, they tell your family that you're dead. Incidentally, I'm dead to my family.
Oh.
I'm a daughter of perdition, and I'm dead. I have two siblings with which I associate that I'm dead. But if they don't decide to literally wipe you out, then you're dead. So what happens is that once, if a child leaves, that is an extreme burden to bear. So very few men leave. What they will do is pull away from the group and stay polygamist and form their own little group. So this is giving you an explanation as to why there's so many groups and why there gets to be more and more and more.
Okay. Now. Okay.
Now
okay.
there's another good reason. These guys, when they form their own group, they form it in the name of a church. They have some sort of church name. Like I was raised in the Apostolic United Brethren. That's the same one Cody Brown's in.
Oh, my.
That's the same one that my 5 wives, Brady Williams, came from.
Oh.
All right. Now, that's where I was raised. My uncle, Dr. Rulon Clark Allred, was the leader of that group. It's the second largest polygamous group in the United States.
In the United States?
Yeah. Of course, they're out of the United States as well now. They've expanded. But my uncle was murdered by a rival cult leader. So the competition is serious.
It sounds like
it's very serious.
And here comes the mob rule.
Yes, the mob rule
is family killing family.
Exactly. And when you say family killing family, you really hit it, because Ervil LeBaron ordered the execution of my uncle, but he also had his own brother killed, who had his own polygamous group. He had his own brother murdered. So there's no holes barred when it comes to sex, power, and money. There's no holes barred. And yet this is all done in the name of God. Now these kids that grow up to believe in that have serious problems with self-acceptance, self-confidence, because they believe, after they're trampled on and their lives are just basically used up and thrown away as martyrs or whatever, they believe that God deserted them. So you can see a lot of these guys in these little offshoot polygamous groups have some serious problems.
Yeah.
They have extreme cases of narcissism, trying to prove that they're good and that they're better than anybody else and they're God's chosen people,
Right.
to the point of becoming insane with power. Hitler went insane with power. Warren Jeffs went insane with power.
True, true.
Ervil LeBaron, my brother-in-law's brother, that had over 30 people murdered, went insane with power. What happens to these little boys that are told that if they don't do this and they don't reach godhood, they're going to be a god in eternity? They are nothing. It is creating and building a sickness and narcissism in these boys. You say, well, gee, I got all these women and it's so great. Now, let me tell you something, guys. My brothers sit down and tell me, I don't want to go home. I say, but you have so many homes to go to. I don't want to go to any of them. Nobody's happy. I can't go anywhere that my wives or children are happy. I've got so many wives and so many children, even if I've only got 3 wives, demanding my attention, neediness, emotional neediness. There is no one ever happy. There's always a problem behind closed doors. There's tears. Everybody's sad. My life is not happy. The only way I can be happy is to go out and try to find a young wife that doesn't know anything about all this and have some immediate happiness in the moment.
Oh.
And my family gets bigger and poorer. I said, did you ever take your sons fishing? No. Why should I? My dad never took me. The only thing I ever do with my sons is work. That's all my dad taught me to do. If my sons don't work with me, we have no relationship. So, is that fun? Is it fulfilling?
No, it doesn't sound like
What
it.
does it do to be or to imagine that you are a man? You could say a woman, but we're talking about men right now.
Right, right.
If you are a man and masculinity is only defined by how much power you can muster over somebody else, you live in a constant state of fear. Because
you make a big point there. Yes.
Well,
yeah.
it's like the king of Bunkers Hill when we were kids. You know, I'm the king of Bunkers Hill, but somebody's going to come throw you off that hill.
Right.
Somebody's going to be bigger. Somebody's going to have more wives and more power and more money. And there's never, never, never enough to take away that horrible insecurity. There is never enough. It takes about 30 years, 35 years for the average individual to overcome post-traumatic stress disorder if it happened in their youth. It takes polygamous kids that long to try to fight their way out of this paper bag. It really does. They'll start coming out, but they still have this extreme lack of self-confidence. You see it in the women as an extreme lack of self-confidence.
Right.
You see it in the men as narcissistic egotism. It's the same thing. If you need to prove so badly that you're a hotshot, that you're willing to crush other people to do it, It isn't them you're trying to prove it to, it's you.
Yourself, yes.
It's a lack of identification about what a man is.
Yeah.
A man, if a man is just the biggest and toughest, bring in King Kong and let us all salute. There's more.
Really?
There's so much more to being a man.
Yeah.
If we're tied into this concept that to respect the buffalo so he's not going to run over us, they tie that respect in with fear. And I understand why they do, because the God of my childhood was so mean. The devil was on unemployment and could only get a part-time job as a scapegoat. Our God was a really, really bad dude.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and so...
Well, that's what they made you believe.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
of course. And we thought we had faith, but in retrospect, fear and faith were the same thing. In our life, fear was faith. Fear made you comply. Fear of damnation, fear of blood atonement, fear of losing your children, fear of the law, fear of the evil people in the outside world. Fear, fear, fear. So these boys learned to install fear to keep people in control.
Right.
And if you look inside, they're empty and they're sad. Now, I had a brother. He's dead now.
I'm sorry.
He had a great position in the AUB, the Apostolic United Brethren. He laundered money for them, massive amounts of money for them.
Oh, my.
My brother was not a good man, but he had a high religious position and everyone thought he was. But he gradually became more and more paralyzed. It took him 16 years to die, and he was still running con games from his telephone until he died. But this is what he thought a man was. This is what he thought a man was. He did not comprehend that respect is something freely given through admiration.
Right.
Respect, real respect, if you're a human and not a gorilla, respect is an honor.
Yeah.
And you give it through the content of your heart and your intellect.
Correct. Not through fear, not through conning, not through...
You can't demand it, you can't scare it up, and you can't buy it.
That's correct.
It's not purchasable. But we were not taught, my brothers were not taught what a man is. I have brothers that were so crippled emotionally. Not just my brother Richard was crippled physically, but so crippled emotionally. My dad's favorite wife's son became a polygamist just like Daddy. When I say just like Daddy, I'm going to tell you what Daddy did. And what Daddy did was common. Daddy would sit down at a table, a small table in his kitchen, and eat a wonderful breakfast, ham and eggs and everything. And his children would be like on picnic tables in the back and have nothing but oatmeal, no sugar, no milk, nothing to go on it, and sit and watch Daddy eat like that.
Oh, my.
My brother, my half-brother from Dad's favorite wife, did exactly the same thing all of his life. And several of my brothers did.
And they kind of call that scripting. This is what you know,
Exactly.
This is what you do.
And I remember, I never grew up in my father's house. My mother was not, I don't have memories of living with my father. So we lived very poor. And
so that's another thing. You don't live under the same roof with the wives and the other children. Each one has their own home?
that, yes and no. It depends on what family you're talking about and what they have to deal with.
Okay.
The most common situation is that all of the children that are born to illegal wives, their birth certificates are forged to protect Daddy from any legal responsibility. So those families all get welfare. And they don't believe women should handle money, so the men come by and get the welfare checks and give you back as little or whatever. If you can work in the fields or whatever, you do it. Now, when there was a short time that my father had 4 wives under one roof, but the house was so small that each wife only had 1 bedroom, so that didn't last very long because they all were having babies every year. So that didn't last. In some of the big compounds, like you saw in Yearning for Zion Ranch in Texas, you saw these huge polygamist homes. The camera went inside and they looked so wealthy, but if you noticed, a lot of those bedrooms were filled with so many bunk beds and so many kids, and when you went into the wife's bedroom, there was a crib here and a little kid's bedroom here, a bed here in her room. Only the prophet or the man of the house had his own suite and sent for the woman he wanted.
Oh my.
He had his own bedroom suite. The women ate like, and the children like in a big dormitory. They didn't have the privacy. They were like living in an eternal college, a work college or a work camp.
Oh, man.
That's how they lived. We didn't grow up believing in Santa Claus and having Christmas. We didn't grow up with toys and roller skates and bicycles. We grew up working in the fields. I tended my little sister on the irrigation ditch banks when I was 4 years old to keep her from falling in while my family worked with the laborers in the fields, sometimes just for a bag or a box of groceries that field harvested, the harvest that day.
And speaking of harvesting, when the young boy has outlived his welcome, so to speak, where do most of these young men go to? Like your brother, he found his way. He slept outside in this. Where do these guys go? Who do they have to turn to? And what's being done to help them?
You know, there's a wonderful man named Dr. Fisher. He's a dentist. You can look him up on the web. When so many of these boys were forced out of Colorado City into St. George, they were just plain homeless. He started gathering them up, doing everything that he could to teach them, everything he could to help them. He just dedicated himself to trying to help those boys get straightened out. Dr. Fisher grew up in polygamy.
Oh.
And he knew what happened. And in those days, when Dr. Fisher grew up, and recently with Warren Jeffs, when Warren Jeffs, see, he still runs his organization, his church, his godliness from his prison cell. He runs his organized crime from his prison cell today. He gets mad at guys and takes away their homes and their wives and everything, gives them to somebody else, just tells them to leave. They can't even go say goodbye. Some of these guys commit suicide.
Well, of course, what other option would they have?
They grew up dedicated to God. So this is why I tell you that there's a difference between the convert and the kid that grows up in it. Because the kid that grows up in it has a harder time dividing reality, because the only reality they've ever known is this cult.
Right.
So they have a lot harder time. A kid that grows up outside and comes into it just because he figures he can collect women, he knows why he's there. He's not there because he thinks God sent him. He's there because he's after the women, period.
Right, right.
So he doesn't have as many psychological problems as the kid that grows up in it. Now, Dr. Fisher worked real hard with these boys, but a lot of them got on drugs. A lot of them started drinking anything. They thought God had abandoned them.
Yeah.
And you can study these boys. Some of their stories are so horrific. So horrific. Some of these boys were violated sexually and abused before they were kicked out.
See, nobody thinks of that, too.
No.
Yeah.
And here's these boys
and that's another power trip thing, isn't
violated by prophets and men of God, and told it was holy, and try to deal with that, and told that they couldn't talk to their moms or sisters or ever see them again. And then their families told that they're dead. They can't talk to them again, they're dead. So these boys believe that they're the sons of perdition. So how great is that? And for guys that figure, okay, I want to have all these wives, I can have all these wives. What about your children?
Yeah.
My father never took his sons anywhere. He never took them fishing. He didn't do anything with his sons. He had so many kids, he just wanted to get away from them. My father couldn't tolerate the responsibility. Now, let me define it a little bit. When Daddy first got married, his first wife, my older sister, her half-sister that came from that marriage, writes really nice things about her childhood with Daddy, sitting on his knee, and what a wonderful daddy he was. I never knew that man.
Rebecca, it is so good to talk to you, and thank you for bringing all of this out into the open. And we're going to have you back. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching Out Here in the Redwoods with your host Denise Riles and my guest Rebecca Kimball. We'll have her back for a 4th episode of Polygamy Today. See you next time.